All right, thank you for joining me for this week's Bible study. Today we'll be studying Colossians 2, 8 through 10. Paul writes, "See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily, and you have been filled in him, who is the head of all rule and authority." Paul begins in verse 8 by saying, "See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy." Now it's important to note that when he says philosophy, he's not referring to the discipline of philosophy. After all, philosophy just means love of wisdom. Rather, at the time of Paul's writing, in both pagan and in Jewish schools of thought, philosophy was kind of a catch-all. It meant any theories about God, the world, the meaning of life, any ethical views, etc. And frankly, this term is still kind of used that way today. You will often hear people speak of philosophy in this very loose sense of my philosophy of life and that sort of thing, as opposed to the discipline or the study of philosophy. That's a little bit more robust. The bottom line is that when Paul uses this term philosophy, he's warning against dangerous views. And as I've stated in previous passages, Paul is responding to some false teaching that is creeping into the Colossian church. So what are the four characteristics of this dangerous philosophy that Paul is speaking of? The first is that it's deceptive when he says empty deceit. That means that this philosophy is taking the faithful off the correct path and deceiving them. The second reason the philosophy is dangerous is because it's based on human tradition. Now, when Paul says human tradition, he doesn't always mean this in a negative way. In fact, there are other places where he uses this terminology in a positive context. Here, however, the problem is that the human tradition is not based on divine truth. So whereas the true gospel is a revelation from God himself through the person of Jesus Christ and has been given to the Colossians as at their start, here we have a human tradition that is creeping into the church that is based on man's ideas and is not based or does not come from the Lord. The third characteristic of this philosophy is according to the elemental spirits of the world. Let's just be frank about this. What Paul is saying is that it is demon controlled. So it's demonic in nature and it's not according to Christ. The fourth characteristic, and even though it's mentioned first, I wanted to discuss it last, is that the philosophy is enslaving, which is to say it takes you captive. So just to summarize, the four characteristics of this dangerous philosophy is that it's deceptive, it's based on human tradition, it is demon controlled, and it is enslaving. Next, we might ask, well, how is it possible to avoid this dangerous philosophy? And the answer is Christ. Verse 9 says, "For in him, in Christ, the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily." In addition to being fully man or truly man, Christ is also fully God or truly God. The very fullness of deity dwells in him. So looking to Christ is the answer. And the good news is, for those who are in him, is that Christ fills us. Look at verse 10. "And you have been filled in him." Believers are fully complete in Christ. And what is true about him? He is the head of all rule and authority. That's another way to say that Jesus is Lord, which is the most important confession of Christianity. Thank you for joining me for this short Bible study.